Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today I'm joined once again by Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp and our good friend Maxance Vincent as we review Osgood Perkins' The Monkey. The second collaboration between Neon and Perkins, The Monkey is an adaptation of the Stephen King short story of the same name and follows the story of a toy wind-up monkey who is found by two boys with the magical power, it seems, of whenever you turn the key in the back of the monkey, it plays its drum kit and someone dies. This is a horror comedy that definitely leans more on the comedy side. It promises big kills and big laughs, and today we are here on the podcast to discuss if this worked for us. We definitely have some varied opinions of Osgood Perkins in general, and today we get to break down his newest feature and decide if it works for us or not. Thank you so much for listening to ClapperCast. Now let's get to our review of The Monkey. Okay, friends, this is definitely going to be an interesting podcast, I will say. Again, when we don't know the quality of a film and we're putting on the schedule, some things can surprise you. And for me, I'll just start. Oz Perkins, The Monkey, definitely surprised me. I'm a pretty big fan of Oz Perkins. We talked about him a little bit last year around Longlegs. I'm a big, I've not seen his first film, but the rest of them I've really enjoyed. The Monkey for me is the second time this year that I've seen a horror movie from a director I really appreciate, and I just kind of sit there and I go, what the fuck are you doing? What's happening here? Not that I hate everything in this, but especially when it comes to the comedy, and this is a comedy first horror film, I found this to be pretty bad to get through. Giving a lot of SNL type humor, very, very repetitive, where you have our main characters and they will meet this quirky character who is feels again like an SNL world character, in my opinion, which I don't find funny in the slightest. Dies a pretty fine death. The gore here is fine. The deaths are okay. I've never seen a film that wants to be Final Destination more. And then it just builds and builds and builds, and then really to nothing. I think there are bits and pieces here we'll get into that are interesting as far as Oz Perkins reflecting on death and coming to terms with death, especially in the first third. I think that's well construed. But the rest of the film, did not do a lot for me. Max, I know you were similar here. What were your thoughts on The Monkey?
I mean, I've seen all of Oz Perkins' films. He hasn't made that many movies. I think this is his fifth one, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds right.
Yes. Okay. Well, I've seen all of his movies, and I've given him a chance now 5 times. I will say that the marketing for Longlegs was quite clever, and I thought to myself, oh, maybe this time he's made a good movie. And nope, he did not make a good movie. That movie was hot fucking garbage. And so when I watched the trailer for The Monkey, I forget which film I went to see. They played the trailer in front of it. I was like, oh, this could be fun. I mean, it's more, because his other movies are more of an acquired taste. You're either into it or not really into it. But this one seemed to have been more crowd pleasing in, I guess, being a more lighthearted horror movie than the heaviness of Longlegs or his other work. So I thought maybe that could be interesting, and I guess he does it again. He's very consistent at how he makes nothing but complete garbage, and now I've wasted my time once again for the 5th time thinking that maybe, just maybe, he's finally made a good movie. But no, he has not made a good movie. He's not made a single good movie. This is probably equally as bad and as infuriating as Longlegs, though for entirely different reasons. It's awful, and I want the 98 minutes I spent watching this piece of garbage back. Thank you very much.
Okay, Jack, we have one more try for Perkins. What are your thoughts on The Monkey?
Well, it's funny about Osgood Perkins because this is years and years and years ago. We were meant to do. I'm sure we were meant to do his Gretel and Hansel film for ClapperCast in one of its first iterations. We were meant to do it years ago, and I don't think it was available. It was during the COVID era, and I think we chose. I think we did Justin Kurzel's True History of the Kelly Gang instead, which I hate that film. So my path for these films might have been a little bit different, but I remember before Longlegs came out, I think me and you, Carson, spoke off air, and we did it with Ty West. We sort of tried to watch all of his filmography. I watched everything but is it Pretty Thing? I think it's his sophomore, and I've really liked everything since. I think Longlegs on a rewatch probably would suffer like what Max says, just about once that mirror and that curtain falls away of what the whole point of going into that, like that character. You're in there for a totally different ride. So it'd be interesting to watch that again. But I'm going to be the contrarian here. I love this, and I didn't know what to expect when I went into it. I remember seeing the previews for it, thinking, oh, like this will be interesting. I like Longlegs. This looks a little bit different. But I all remember that the first preview I saw, the trailer, the teaser, didn't seem to be very funny. Then the whole promotional campaign was like, oh, we can't get this past the ratings board. And then we spoke about this. I think this might have been off air on a couple of months ago. Carson, they were showing all the kills in the trailers, and then the tone was like, oh, it's actually a comedy. I was like, oh, I don't know about that one, because horror and comedies is, I don't know. You either get Shaun of the Dead or you get something like just like something atrocious. And walking into this, I adored this for I'll say 2/3 of it. I'll if we go into spoilers at the end, I think the third act loses the plot big time. I think there's certain decisions here and certain characteristics and plots and arcs that just go a little bit too wild. But for the most part, I found this like devilishly cheeky. There's something about how silly and stupid this was. Again, in the frame of I think the Final Destination Bloodlines teaser showed before this, and I was like, oh god! And then this was exactly what this was exactly the same. But I had so much fun with this. I'm not too sure why. Perhaps I like the palette. I don't know what it is, because I agree with both your sentiments, and I can understand both of them. But I enjoyed the campy nature to it. I enjoyed the silliness to it. I enjoyed that this is so dumb yet so funny. And it was actually a really nice palette cleanser compared to Longlegs as well. And I must admit, it actually reinforced how much I like this director. Of all the features I've seen to him concerning horror, particularly what he's directed, I've been really impressed with the tonal change and everything. Like Longlegs to this is totally different. Hansel and Gretel is totally different, and the one with Keenan Shipka, who I adore, the Blackcoat's daughter. I think that's excellent how he plays with narrative there. I'm interested to see The Keeper after this, but I'm interested in The Pretty Thing as well. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought Theo James was outstanding in this as well. Yeah, I suppose we'll have to get into specifics, but there's another one. Like he's slowly becoming one of my favorite like horror filmmakers today. However, I have read both of your reviews, and I'm very interested to get into specifics about his film, his use of like camera and his technical ability, because that is the one thing I think you could probably argue that he's nowhere near the master of a craft to his contemporaries. But I quite like that. It's almost like a redeeming quality he has. I don't find them in any way to be I don't know, not like outlandish, but I don't know what the word is escaping me, but something where like he's trying to be something he's not. I think I quite like the fact that he's quite restrained in not being high, like he's not being extravagant behind the camera. But I'll let one of you two go next. I'm interested to know where we go with this now.
See, I feel like this really cemented my idea that, like, I think out of everything Osgood Perkins does, and I think he does a lot of things well, comedy is just not one of those for me. My biggest issue with Longlegs was Nicolas Cage. And I feel like he, especially when he's writing something that he wants to be comedic or funny, just has this, like, creates this very, very, in his mind, campy and just very out of place character or moment. And he's like, look, it's so funny that it's just so weird and it's there and it's so loud. And literally, Nicolas Cage gives me a headache when I watch Longlegs. I cannot watch Longlegs because of him. I think it does not work. This is that character. It's that conceit, but just like through an entire film. I would say the most comparable comedy I genuinely could say to this is like Y2K from last year. I don't know if either of you saw it, but like it feels like Y2K. The issue between these films is that I think Y2K works fine because it's trying to just be a very dumb, you have Fred Durst there punching AI. Like it's not trying to be anything serious, right? It works because of the nature of what that film is trying to be, for me at least. I think here, and I do agree that I think the general public will probably be more with you, Jack. My theater was like eating this up, having the time of their lives with this. Can't say I related. I find all of those moments where you have these weird characters and wigs that don't fit and they're giving really bad like dialogue. We'll get to like the whole B segment in a little bit later when we get into spoilers. So I think that's like where I really started to be like, wait, this is not coming together how I hoped it would. The issue with that is for me here on this grounded level, and it is a short story from Stephen King, is a really quite compelling, and it's not like you can't have something that's compelling and funny, but it's a quite compelling look at death and loss, and there's violence and it's extreme blood. I mean, extreme violence. And at every point when there's something like that that works, it turns to something that just treats it like it's a joke. It feels like nothing here understands the film it's making. Every single, from the kills to every single individual performance, feels like they're on completely different wavelengths, to the point where there's some people here, two characters or two actors specifically, who play two different characters. And like, one of the characters that each one plays is pretty good. It's pretty fine. I agree. Theo James here is fine as one of the characters. And then the other one is just like some of the worst acting I've ever seen in my life and performance. Like, it's awful. It's cringy. It feels weird to the point where I think like, I guess we'll save some of that for spoilers. I don't want to get too far into it, but like, I just think that it doesn't work. And for me, the issue is that these different identities are contrasting and are fighting for me to where like, it's not coming together, and I'm not having the fun with the film that I want it to have because there's all this darkness and all this stuff that I think Oz Perkins is more known for. At the same time, though, I'm not able to enjoy that because then there's also these scenes of like a kaleidoscope that's all the monkey, and there's a giant monkey in a suit chopping up Theo James as a toy, and like the scenes just don't blend for me. This feels so messy. It feels to me again very Wolfman in the aspect that like there's stuff here I can see, but man, the vision got lost somewhere. I don't know how you feel, Maxance, because I know you really hate the film.
I saw a review on Letterboxd that I think sums up my feelings well, and it's Deadpool for the A24 crowd. It's such a cynical, boring attempt at trying to be funny, where there's this extremely over-the-top death scene that happens all the time, and then the joke isn't necessarily the death scene. There are some death scenes that are quite funny. There's one that involves a closet door and a shotgun that I thought was quite funny, but it's the joke is not that. It's the characters reacting to the death going, "Whoa, what the fuck was that? Holy shit." And that's supposed to be really funny. And that's like the bulk of the comedy is basically that. Or it's they say something and then they quick cut to a funeral like they do with one of the characters of the movie. And that visual gag is supposed to be funny, but they do it way too many times. And the jokes repeat themselves over and over and over and over and over again. And one word that I want to say about the craft of the film, I think, and I try not to say, because I don't think it's a positive term in criticism nowadays, but some people have a tendency to call some filmmakers as hacks, and I don't try to do that. But listen, this guy's a hack. I'm sorry. He has, first of all, no idea how to shoot a frame, and B, none of his frames are his. Like, you cannot point me, like, Long Legs, as an example, is Silence of the Lambs with David Fincher's aesthetic. This is, he's trying to riff on some horror comedies, on Final Destination, on even sometimes there are some De Palma compositions at some point later on. I was like, wow, like he's really just robbing people. I mean, one of the posters of the film that Neon has put out is a parody of Hardcore by Paul Schrader, where it's always appropriating different styles, different filmmakers, and never necessarily making it his own. It's like, well, you're stealing from this guy, you're stealing from this guy, you're stealing from this guy. Like, when am I ever going to watch an Osgood Perkins movie? I felt like I've never seen that, and it feels strange to say, because Perkins himself has a very personal and sadly tragic relationship with death. If you know his story, how his parents died, both under different but tragic circumstances. So you would think he'd have something to say about death and about the characters that he draws in the film, about their relationship with death, especially in their relationship with their mother, who's played by Tatiana Maslany. But the only thing that he has to say is that everybody dies, and that's fucked up. That's true, But like, what else? Like, what else can you say about death that makes living in this world very complicated when we all know that we are all going to die at some point. We're talking to each other, but we're all going to die at some point. So what makes that so complicated? Trying to move on from death when we know that it's coming for us as well. We never really see that. It's more of it's a joke. It's one joke after the next, one over the top kill after the next. Some of them are fun, but at some point it kind of loses its momentum, especially when it does this dumb twist with the brother at the end. I'm not going to necessarily reveal that right now. That I just thought like, oh please, like it's I just rolled my eyes, and it was just kind of, I don't know, it made an already bad movie even worse. And I was speaking to a friend of mine after the screening, and he actually enjoyed the film up until that point, and then he was like, "Nah, it sucks." So I guess it's I'm looking at the reactions on social media, and they seem to be a lot more mixed than the positive reception that Longlegs has. I was not at all positive on Longlegs, but whatever. I understand why some people liked it, but this one, I don't like it at all.
I don't disagree with the idea of like Perkins having a visual aesthetic. I do agree with that. I think it's the one quality throughout all of his work where I completely understand it. I think if you showed anyone a frame of any five of his films, and that's going back from anything, and again, it goes back to a positive. I said I think everything's tonally quite different, granted, but I do agree. I think if you showed one frame for anything, I think it would be someone of an auteur that would get the first answer. Then it'd be someone sort of middle ground for the second, and then if you'd have to give them a guess, then they'd get it on the third or fourth go. I don't think that's necessarily a positive for any for a director in this age now. I think you've got to have a visual style, like you said multiple times, Max. Especially on the Kingdom of the Planet, film is a visual medium. Like you've got to have something that stands out from the crowd. And horror now is probably on its like third massive boom after probably the 70s, even the early 2000s. You could probably say, but it feels now that it's really getting sort of a massive resurgence with authorship, especially with like the Jordan Peele's, James Wan, Lee Winnell, who said the Wolfman. Like it's all becoming incredibly mainstream. And when you look at this, there just isn't a sense of style. However, I do quite like that because I'm of the age, and I don't mind bringing this up. I'm at the age now where when I got first into horror, or horror became mainstream for me, was the early 2000s boom. So I remember watching Final Destination on DVD, and I remember like that to me is like farcical comedy, like, not comedic horror, but farce comedy in a sense of it plays with the terms and tones of horror, and you ultimately know the inevitable what's going to happen, but it's having fun with the suspense. I've sort of see a similar approach of what Perkins does of all of his filmography. Longlegs probably excluding. He does this thing where he makes you wait an incredible amount of time in pause and setup, and so I think sometimes that end result is slightly anticlimactic, especially in certain things like Gretel and Hansel. You know where that's going to go. Longlegs, I think, is unpredictable to a certain nature, but uses its whole titular character as an envoy to try get you in there. Everything else, I think he plays with pacing quite well. Here, I do agree that when you watch it, it doesn't have a personality in visual style, but I quite like that farcical nature to it all. I quite like the idea of that he's sort of not playing with. This might be different. This is a different sentiment. I don't see this as a comedy per se. I see this as farce. I do see him playing with tones, with thematics, with conventions. I think he you know how things are going to go in a certain way, and he's just playing with those circumstances. I think very much in a similar way, although not similar in a sense of the Saw franchise. Everybody knows sort of when we get into this room, we know that someone's going to die. We know that this scenario is going to be horrifying, but it's just how horrifying and how gripping that whole set piece can be crafted. And I think here it is just sometimes so effortlessly silly. Like the pool sequence for one, which is in all the trailers, is like blink and you miss it. You've got another scene towards the end, which is blink and you'll miss it. the only times where he pivots and allows you to have sort of any sort of suspense, again, like you said about the cupboard sequence or the thing, like it is all reactionary to it, which is, I think, again, is probably not the biggest positive I can give to it, because you're constantly having to wait with the weight of the film. And I also agree. I'm not trying to throw the consensus here, but I do agree that if you're going to build some form of very tight suspense and give a massive bang and a boom, the resulting aftermath after that has to mean something. You have to be absorbed into it. And this film is quite quick to move on, especially in that sequence when you mentioned again, especially in that house in the second act where something happens, and we sort of, he doesn't build to it at all. Very strange how he builds to it, and then it builds to it very quickly. It's over very quickly, and then it seems to just be resolved very quickly. That to me is a sort of strange method of how to build what type of texture of horror. I'm not necessarily sure what Oz Perkins is figuring out at that time. That being said, I do really like the set pieces here. I do really like the fast nature to it. I like the fact that when this film opens, and there's like a strange cameo that I didn't really notice at first. Like, shit, is that who that is? Who I think it is. There's like there's something happens and something shoots into something, and it's like, all right, and then something comes back out, and everybody in my theatre like burst out laughing, all four of us. I just quite find that funny. I like that he's building up to something, and you know that there's something in the event, the inevitable is going to happen. There's going to be, it's all over the promotional imagery. It's all over the promotional trailers. This sense of like, oh, this it's so gory. It is. It does live up to that expectation. But the question is what else is after that? I will concede. I don't think this film has got very much to say aside from it being naturally connected to the maker's beliefs about death, which is quite morbid to begin with. His fascination with death is quite frightening to begin with. I think if you look into it and read about all these things in relationship with the devil and stuff like that, granted it's mostly through the Longlegs promotional tour, but there's an interesting factor there. But nevertheless, the argument is what does it have to say? What is it trying to suggest? Nothing. Which I think is quite a nice relief after Longlegs, because I think there's a lot going into that film about. I've read a lot of readings of that film about like CS, like child abuse issues, and I think it's interesting because there was a lot of thing about her being autistic in the film. And then people are reading it to suggest that well, it could be also this reading. I thought was quite interesting. I don't think you're going to have any form of secondary reading of this. That is the question. Does it need it? Not particular. I think it's just a horror film like you Final Destination. I think it's there. It's like Saw. It's there. Have some fun with it. I don't think it needs a second run of emotive or theatrical depth here. I don't think it's trying to project that. Which then probably begs the question of the only reason why it's doing a successful run is because it's so gory. I don't mind that. I don't mind that it's one note in that regard. I think it's quite refreshing. I think it's really well done for being one note. It's not, it's not something that's vulgarity to me. Although it can blur the lines quite a lot. I think that's what Carson, you were saying. Like, if it's going to go for the vulgarity and just be gore, like the Terrifier series, like if that's what you're there for, that's fine. I think this is sort of pulled back from that approach, and I quite like the fact that it is what it is. It is just a very strange, comedic, farcical nightmare with very little else to say. I don't know. I find that quite refreshing. Although it'd be interesting to go further into that, but I'll let Carson move it on.
Well, I really want to respond to your points. I couldn't really argue against either, but I think that neither for me were as effective as you were saying. With Final Destination, I think also just an issue of like, I'm a big fan of Final Destination. Even the new Bloodlines trailer shows some pretty compelling, it looks like, deaths outside of the one at the beginning of you mentioning at the monkey in the pawn shop, where something goes in, something comes out. That's very funny and that's very elevated. Outside of that, I really struggle to think of many deaths here that feel that creative or that satisfying or that fulfilling. As you mentioned, a lot of them go by very quickly. Final Destination, and it gets sillier with each Final Destination as it goes on, and it, uses some more and more interesting visual effects as the series goes on. even with Saw, as you mentioned, like all those have such a strong buildup, or like that is such a foundational piece of the iconography. And here it's advertising itself as that's what it's trying to do. And that is undeniably what it's trying to do to a point. But like outside of that opening kill, I can't really say any felt that memorable, felt that creative, felt that satisfying. I don't know. For me, the identity, it's there, but it didn't work nearly as well. I also think this film just like, I agree it doesn't need to have the depths of something like Longlegs. Obviously, it's trying to be, I mean, also just adapting a short story. It's not trying to be something overly deep. It's trying to be something that is more digestible and enjoyable. But like, I feel like there is such a deeper message here that's like just screaming, trying to get out, and it just never is. For me, if you look at the message of this film, what it reminds me of is like Oz Perkins shows up to therapy day one to talk about death and talk about his relationship to death, but he gets super uncomfortable, so he throws all this comedy out instead, where it's like just trying to mask everything. And the comedy is not really crafted, it's not really that funny, it's just like it's kind of awkwardly there surrounding this much more interesting story within. For me, it felt like that story of death and everyone dies, so how do you live and how do you dance through that? For me, it felt like the film had so much more it wanted to say in that regard. Not that it, again, needed to be this deep drama, like, or be as deep as Longlegs and lore. Like, I'm not saying it has to go that level, but it felt like there was so much more here. And whenever it was like just about to get to the heart, like, here comes the guy in a bad wig. And it's just, for me, that felt so frustrating over and over, similar to Wolfman, where like, oh, it has some really interesting conversations there, but then it just completely loses all logic and goes balls to the wall. Like, this is very similar in a way that just was so frustrating to watch, in a way that I've not felt about any Oz Perkins film to date. I think he's always normally, for me, really crafted and really focused on what he wants to say and building that message out. Here it feels disjointed in a way that, like, for me is new for the director, but in a way that I just found like so frustrating. Really hurt my experience. I hope you've been enjoying our review of The Monkey. I want to quickly pop on here to remind you guys that if you want even more ClapperCast, you can get it on our Patreon at patreon.com/ClapperCastPodcast. You can go ahead and sign up for just a couple bucks a month to gain an exclusive bonus episode every single month. Every single month we do a brand new review. This month, myself and Jak-Luke Sharp reviewed To Sleep with Anger, but we have literally dozens of episodes, including a John Waters double feature. We have extra episodes of some of our series, including David Lynch December, including our Road to Halloween series, including our Summer of Blockbuster series. And a little scoop for you today, there is another series coming up in a couple months, and again, there will be a bonus episode included in that series available on our Patreon. If you don't like Patreon, you can also subscribe to our Spotify subscriptions page. Just on our Spotify page, just scroll down until you see a bonus episode. Go ahead and click it, and you should be prompted to sign up for, again, just a couple bucks a month. Not only are you gaining access to exclusive content every single month and our entire back catalog of bonus reviews, but you're also helping us keep the lights on here on the podcast, and we greatly appreciate you for that. Thank you so much for those who have already subscribed to the Patreon, and we hope to see you over there very soon.
I think I just to add to that, I don't disagree at all. I think the one thing here that feels different to the other stuff is that everyone in the other films understood the tone. Like when you're watching Gretel Hansel, everybody in there knows that this is a supernatural fairy tale that's quite frightening, and I think all the characters in there are conscious of that. Longlegs, they're conscious of the fact that there's a Nicolas Cage across there doing some strange things, looking very strange, and there's something not quite right in that whole film. There's a tonal consciousness there that everyone feels a part of, and the audience and the characters feel akin, they're at one. This doesn't. This to me feels like we find this funny, but the characters don't. And I think there's like a tonal dissonance there once you watch this film to that extent. I also agree to that. That's what made it funnier for me in a sense. Like, and that might be me reading into this far too much. And I agree. I think that isn't going to work for a lot of people. But I find that quite refreshing and fun in a sense that I know that this is so stupid, yet they don't. Like they're not acknowledging it. That will only work with a certain type of sentiment for a particular type of audiences, and I think a lot of perspectives there will shift there, because I think you'll look at that and I think it does come across quite like a dissonance, because it feels far more stupid then. Like there are certain elements that happen in here, like ridiculous, genuinely like so stupid, and I think there's a seriousness to it, and I think it doesn't allow a certain other character, these twins, let's say, to have a little bit more fun there, because it comes across like it's trying to go a little bit too serious. And then when it references all this thematic with death and relationship with how to deal with that, I don't think that hits quite as emotive, because it's so reinforced to be this. Well, there's actually a bit of seriousness here. I like the fast scenes at again. Again, not to get into spoilers, but there's a scene at the pool, and it happens so quick, and it's so sort of perplexing yet funny. And then because we have this result when we go back to the hotel room, and it's like someone's losing their mind. Really quite fun, really quite funny. But like everyone takes it so seriously within the film. If there was a little bit more tongue-in-cheek nature to it, a bit self-referential humor, or even a wink of acceptance of like, yeah, this is quite silly, isn't it? Like a talking monkey, or like a monkey like killing monkey. Like I think it would have a little bit more openness to it, but I think because it's closed off, I think there's a different relationship there to it, sort of attach oneself to it. Because then you get towards like the really last few minutes, and not to get into spoilers, but there's like this is very on the nose messaging, and it's like, oh, that's like quite serious, and then it literally ends on another comedic moment. And I'm like, you obviously know what you're trying to project here. At least just have a little bit more tongue in cheek nature with it. Like allow the characters to acknowledge that this is ridiculous and this is stupid, and just allow the film to have a bit of freedom. Let it open up. It's a little bit stiff to that regard, and I think a lot of audiences will find that strange, and will have a very strange relationship with that type of horror.
Thank God you didn't spoil the pool scene, because they did such a good job keeping that under wraps. I wouldn't want to
Yeah,
dare spoil that for anyone else.
that. So I know Max is winning, but I find that a really strange promotional idea. If you're going to show everything in the film, then you've got to have at least a little bit of weight of material in the film itself when you go to watch it, to have a bit more substance. To just do that and showcase all of its kills, to me, it's either someone be in a producer's chair not knowing A, how to promote this, or B, having nothing to promote and then showing it all. And then watching it, I'm like, it's not really either. I find it really strange. I tell you what really pisses me off about these type of films, though, is that I remember going to watch Imaginary not so long ago. And watching it, I'm being bored shitless throughout that film, like absolutely bored shitless. Like we're watching a talking, like not talking, but we're actually watching this bear, like groom this young girl, and then there's like, we're in this like fairy tale where we can write doors on walls and we're going to a parallel universe. And I'm watching and thinking like, why is everyone taking this so seriously? Why are we taking this? This is so fucking stupid. And I was watching this and I found it so refreshing not to watch something so pretentious. I don't know. I found this like quite not rewarding experience, but I do find it quite redeeming. But maybe that's because I'm just so tired within the genre of watching just generic shitty horror movies that are way too poor for their own good. Maybe it's the 2 months of Hooktober last year. I don't know.
You know, I think the marketing campaign for this movie was as clever as Long Legs, but I I I feel like I've been fooled too many times that Oz Perkins can make a movie, and I don't think I think Long Legs was far more hilarious than the monkey, though for unintentional reasons, especially when it came to Nicolas Cage going, "Let me in now, and it will be nice," and then screaming, "Daddy, mommy, save me from the hell of," like it's not supposed to be funny, but when I saw that in a sold out theater, people were laughing. I don't know if that was the intended reaction, but it was certainly very, very, very funny. As for the monkey, I'm not sure that I agree with the fact that the movie is stages some funny kills. I think it lacks the sense of skill that Final Destination had. Just looking at the trailer for Bloodlines, which I think looks infinitely better, it seems that there's actual planning, especially visually, in trying to build tension. with like I remember in Final Destination, I think it was the fifth one. There's this death scene in the gym. That is a great scene because we see the objects that are in the character's way. We get some sense of tension, and the death happens, and it's equally as shocking. Even with the buildup, it remains relatively shocking. Whereas in The Monkey, the deaths are just like, I don't know how to say it, but there's no buildup, very little buildup, and it's usually just boom, big person exploding, or this big shocking that there's a cobra in a golf hole, or what have you, and it's supposed to be like really. I mean, bombastic is not a good word, but really loud in your face, so you can go oh in the theater, then laugh it off when a character goes, "What the fuck was that?" or whatever, and it's just at some point it becomes increasingly tiresome, even if there's at some point some buildup that I found a little interesting, but Perkins doesn't necessarily play with that. And I want to talk about Theo James a little bit because I like Theo James a lot. I think he's a very good actor. Unfortunately, he has not his filmography has not been the best one. If we look at his work in the Divergent series, I'm still waiting for that fourth installment. No, I'm just kidding. And the Underworld franchise as well. He hasn't necessarily been. His talents haven't been the best exploited within Hollywood, but he gave a really incredible performance last year in Guy Ritchie's The Gentleman, the TV series.
Agreed. Very good.
That he was so good in that show. He was so funny, and I literally I was watching and I was going like, where have you been this entire time? Because I remember he was in Downton Abbey, the first season. His character dies in the first episode, but not in the first episode, one of the episodes. And I was like, well, that's a little shocking. But apart from that, he hasn't necessarily been in that many great stuff. And yeah, when he was in The Gentleman, he was just so good. And I said to myself, like, I think this is the beginning of a new path for him in his career, where he's just going to have fun and do roles that are vastly different from the typecasting that he was boxed in. But I thought he was boring in this movie. Like, both characters that he plays, they're very well. I mean, one is more deadpan than the other. One is a little bit more silly because he's still a little bit shaken, I guess, by the death of his mother. But both of them are just, not that interesting of characters. I actually like I forget the kid who played Christian Convery. He was much better than Theo James in playing the twins. And I also think the film goes nowhere in developing a solid relationship with Hal and his son, Petey. I thought that was kind of boring. I wish, when Elijah Wood appears for like one scene, I was like, oh, that's actually pretty funny. He's very good. He's having fun. But then he eats from the movie. He's no longer there. We never see him again. So that was kind of disappointing. But yeah, I like the cast in this movie. I just don't think they're any good. Like, they waste Adam Scott. They waste Tatiana Maslany, who's actually quite good. She gives a very good performance in this movie, but doesn't really have that much screen time. That said, she's going to be the lead of Perkins' next film, so here's hoping that's going to be good. But Adam Scott as well. He's in one scene. Osgood Perkins himself makes a cameo. So it's a solid cast, solid actors, but they're not doing their best work. And I was very disappointed at seeing Theo James deliver such another flimsy performance. When he just gave an amazing performance in that show, The Gentleman.
I don't disagree with that either, but his thing about Theo James is that in Britain, he was made infamous, let's say, in 2011, where he played like a little shitty villain in a TV series that made a movie called The Inbetweeners, where he snorts shit. Like he's meant to snort cocaine. I think he snorts like shit. And like, I think there was a time in Britain where once you were in The Inbetweeners was so big in England, it was massive at a certain cultural standpoint. It's like a heritage TV show. I think it was really difficult for him at that time to sort of push away from it. And I think he did go to America. I think it's one of the classic tales, like the Sam Worthington before him and all those type of actors. where they get pushed into being in like these film franchises without really having a modicum of success or range, and thrown into these characters. And it's the same with Underworld, which I think are probably a bit. I don't mind. I have a soft spot for those films. And then they have it with the Divergent series, and I think both of them sort of rejected him after a while. I don't think he could fit really back into the English, because he was always reminded of that character. And also in America, he had two big goes at film franchises, two very wildly different tones and audiences, and never really settled. And I do think it's been age that really settled him into honing his craft, allowing him to gravitate to the work rather than the work gravitate towards. And I agree with Max. I think he's really good in a Gentleman TV show. I think he's really good charisma in that. But he's allowed for 9 hours to just resonate. Here, it's an interesting one because there's a lot of time spent with him as a child. His character as a child in a dual role. Now, I'll also, again, agree to this. That is so repetitive as an arc. That is what feels like 45 minutes of the film, just going to do the same thing in just different scenarios. And granted, yes, it's showing how difficult this relationship has been, and it's setting the standard, and it's setting the tone, and it's foreshadowing for the inevitable climax. But there's nothing in aside from like the strange foreshadowing, which he uses as a kill towards the end. There's nothing really there to use as substance throughout the last act, which I find so strange. You're watching 45 minutes of two characters who don't get along, and there's a warring faction then, yes, and then the mother's in the middle, and she's keeping everything together, and then that sort of sets up the issues further down the line. But other than that, you've got one character who's a bit of a nerd, and one character who's just an absolute arsewipe. And there's no more substance to it than that. There's no more depth. There's no more arc. There's nothing to suggest otherwise. There is this inclination that the lack of the mother being there is one that obviously is a detriment to one of these characters' lives and takes him down a path. But there isn't anything to suggest that even when she was there, that he was going to be a nice person to begin with. So I didn't quite understand that arc. And then, yes, there's a lot of like backstory to go into this, and it doesn't feel fulfilled. And I also agree, weirdly enough, to play two characters and to be the main actor here, it's weird that he doesn't seem to be in this a lot. I was watching this and he doesn't seem to be in it. And there's definitely pacing issues here. There's definitely a lot of issues of going into what to cut out, what to prolong. Well, we need this for depth, and then we sort of have this repetitive nature to which, granted, perhaps is this tongue-in-cheek, farce nature to the film in general. He's trying to project with the characters and the arcs, and there's going to be this issue of, well, there's a repetitive nature to everything, with everyone dying around them, and they can't seem to figure anything out. But even that's sort of such a cop out. I just think it's very, so on occasion, quite poorly paced. But I just wanted to mention as well, in 2015 and 2016 made two films. He then has a 4-year gap for 2020 in Gretel and Hansel. Then he waits another 4 years to make Longlegs, and then between Longlegs and this year, he's pumped out 3 movies. They're on such quick turnaround, and part of me thinks it might be due to that. And I'm not trying to get him a get out of jail free card, because I quite like him as a filmmaker, in a sense of I quite like this bravado that he brings, and this temperament, and this comedic endeavor, which again is not, is 1 for 3 in this crowd. So he's not a great batting average. Don't get me wrong, but I do think he's pushing these out to a degree where, again, not to go back to the law here, but the first 3 or 4 Saw movies are very good, because one is made in 2004. Then it's 2005, then it's 2006, then it's 2007. There's years gap there. But they all feel like they're taking an evolutionary difference. And then you get the other ones that feel like, right, here we go. These are made in like 8-month periods, and you can tell it's so cheap. This to me sort of feels like the latter half of the Saw franchise, in that he's pumping these out to a degree where I think if you just spent a little more time on this, a little more revision in your pacing and perhaps even in your screenplay, and tighten these up, I think these would be even more powerful. I think that's where you would get your depth. But to that regard, I must admit, when you look at the influences of him as an actor, especially as a director, but also as a person, you look at his father's work. Those films that his father made, granted, not the first one, but when you get to the latter of the Psycho 2, which is incredibly underrated, anyone go out there, watch the sequel to the Arrow Blu-ray release is excellent of it. Go watch Psycho 2, it's excellent. But when you get to 3 and 4, they're like 80, 90-minute features of very standard surface depth, and it's the kills. I can understand that that's the sort of the approach that he's been brought up with, and that's the sort of horror things he likes. He just brings a certain, granted, depth to it in terms of his association with death and perhaps the occult. I do think all these films are definitely going to be revealed to be in universe as well. You can just feel that shit's coming. I don't have anything wrong with that, but I don't mind that, because there was a certain sequence where Petey's in a room when something gets shot, and if you look above him, it's like there's this shadow on the roof. I was like, why would you show that? I was like, it just reminded me of Longlegs, so we'll wait for the screenshots of the Blu-ray release. But yeah, Theo James was an interesting one. I quite liked it, but granted, there's not enough depth there considering that the arc is so long. I don't mind the cameos. There's only sort of like 2 or 3 of them, but the Adam Scott one was funny, but totally out of place. The Elijah Wood one, I'm like, that. What are we going to do anything with that? That whole relationship with his son is so underwhelming. Like there's just nothing there. And granted, the relationship on screen, they don't have a arc. Let's say they don't have a relationship. Granted, the film projects that as such, but when they're together, you don't get a sense of growth either. You don't get a sense of this film. These two are growing in the adversary of what they're going against. It just feels like it plateaus. So it's more we talk about this, more sort of bringing myself down on it. And maybe it's one of those films that just works great in an auditorium. The first thing I did when I messaged my wife was like, you just take your mom to go watch this. Like, she likes horror movies. Like, you'll have loads of good fun with this. I think it's a really good film to just watch and not have anything associated to it. The thing is that I think it comes across slightly anticlimactic considering the last few films he's made, which specifically with Longlegs, but even to Gretel and Hansel, there's all this sort of sublimable type of energy and thematics and weight of, well, these type of characters in this world, where do they fit? Where does this young woman fit in quite a dark and regressive religious background in the middle of nowhere? Where do these 2 boys fit in the sense of trying to come to terms with the tragedy and trauma that they've got? It just feels a little bit too undercooked to be an outstanding feature. But again, I don't hold that. I don't hold it responsible for not wanting to be that. I think it just adds a really good fun time. I don't know what you. I don't know Carson's opinion, but what did you think of Halloween Ends, Max? Because I got the same. Not because this has got another connection with an actor in this, but I got a sense it was eerily familiar to that. Is that those films, that Halloween Ends to me and this, and granted, I'm far more positive to one and the other. But Halloween Ends to me is this idea of like it gives this approach of like, oh, well, we're going to do something a little bit like different here. And like, oh, maybe we're going to change the thematic. No, let's just do the kills. Let's have some fun with it. Maybe even Halloween Kills to more extent. I felt it was just exactly the same here. It just wanted to have a good time. It wasn't interested in exploring the mythos like Halloween 2018 was. I quite liked that as an audience member. I didn't want something to get like, oh, well, Longlegs is this because of that. Like, I quite like the approach of it just being surface level. But that's just my opinion.
I think Halloween Ends is terrible.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you there.
One of the worst Halloween installments, maybe the worst one. It's been a while since I've seen it, but yeah, no, I remember seeing the film, going, "What the fuck was that?" and just vehemently trashing like it when it came out. I thought it was just awful, and I like the other ones that David Gordon Green directed, but this was just, oh my god, this was just terrible. But funnily enough, Rohan Campbell is in this too. He plays the fake police officer. Didn't recognize him until the end credits arrived.
Neither did
I.
I.
I was like, yeah, okay. He did a much better job in this film than he did in Halloween Ends, but that wasn't his fault. That movie was just hot garbage. So no, yeah. So I don't necessarily think there are any points of comparison to be made to Halloween Ends with the monkey, other than it's a bad film, and the monkey is, I don't know if it's equally as bad, it's perhaps a little bit more watchable, because you've got some you got some cool kills, and if you have an audience that's receptive, it might be fun to watch it with a sold out crowd. I don't know if my crowd was, I don't know if it was sold out, but it was pretty full, and people seem to have a good time. I have no idea, but I do know that the ending soured on a lot of people's thoughts. A lot of people did not like the ending, not appreciate it. I just thought it made the movie worse. So yeah,
I do think if like this comedy is your type of comedy, if you go and just have a few drinks and have like no expectations with friends in a full theater, like you're probably gonna laugh. Like it's probably gonna be a fine time. I think if you just expect anything beyond that is where you're gonna get disappointed. Like even if you just want like a good crafted movie, this is definitely, I would say, not that experience. What would you guys have thought if it was just all when they were kids? Because looking back on it, I think a lot of the best parts for me were when they were kids. I don't really see any reason why, as adults, it got better, and it would have helped, I think, with pacing.
I think it's cool to make movies where kids are the protagonists and you just traumatize the living shit out of them. I think no, I think it's a great genre. I think in Quebec there are a bevy of films that were made in the 1980s and 1990s where these were children's movies. Like these were predominantly aimed at children. I shit you not. We were shown, I forget what it's called at school. It is starring kids, and it is for kids. Genuinely has some of the most nightmarish imagery you will watch in your entire life. It has scarred a generation of people. I forget the title because I've only watched it in that context, and I've had so many sleepless nights over this movie, and it was for children. So I think it's cool to have movies where you put kids in frightening situations and scare the living hell out of them, and you wonder how in the hell they're going to get out of the situation. I think that's entertaining. I don't think for this film it's particularly executed well. Could it have worked? Sure, if the script was better. But the problem with Oz Perkins' script for me is that he has a tendency to over-explain things to the point where he's just hand-holding the audience and going like, look, this is what it's about. Or like we're repeating the rules of the monkey, or I guess we're just inventing arbitrary stuff. And that was my problem with Longlegs. It's like, it's trying to be this subtle thriller that doesn't necessarily want to infer on many things with the audience, but then the characters are just mouthpieces of exposition that just over-explain things. And it's like, well, okay, well then I know what the movie's about, whether or not the film has a unique or elevated visual style. And that was the problem that I had with the monkey as well. I think a movie like this shouldn't take itself seriously, and it should just be fun from beginning to end and not have this sort of fractured familial drama lead the second half of the movie with Theo James. I think it should just be a fun time at the movies, where kids are being traumatized and audiences are equally being traumatized as well.
I agree. I think they should have just stayed as the two young boys. I think that you had a lot more terror, you had a lot more suspense, a lot more atmosphere. The fact that they're figuring out as they go on, trying to form this relationship, and there's a bond there that's broken with the resulting issue that happens in that first act. I think it adds more variety, and also I think it adds more depth, and I think it has a little bit more richness to it. But the problem is that this is partly through the vein of Perkins himself, and therefore he has no sort of relationship of making a film where two kids form that have that form of adult relationship, in a sense of like having to bond and going through that tragedy. I think he looks at it through the eyes of what he's doing now, writing it as he is now, which is a middle-aged man, which I don't think there's not any issue there. That's from his perspective. But granted, for the feature itself, I do think it comes across as a bit of a missed opportunity. And it's all the range now. The It films proved that type of horror bangs. The Welcome to Derry TV show, it's going to bang on HBO Max. So there's a lot of stuff where children and horror go hand in hand for how frightening this. And also, I think that if this film would open a lot more up when you have two kids at that age, because you have, I think it's a 15 in the UK, so it's R-rated. not too sure about the Canadian rating boards, but the US one, I know it's R-rated. It's 15. I think you've got the age range there of watching these two kids. I think you gravitate to more of an audience of that representation as well, which I think is more beneficial for getting bums on seats. And because of the tone of the film, I think you appreciate a lot more. Once this film opens up for adults and the texture of it is not as rich and is not sufficient or even to explore itself, just to unravel of adult themes about having a son, having a wife, having a brother, or like trying to be an adult. I think you do lose a grasp of an audience member who's watching this and then laughing 5 minutes later, then being horrified 2 minutes later, and then trying to find some adult orientated thematic in between. It doesn't quite hit as hard as it would be for them two boys. I think the two young kids are very good at it as well. I'm pretty sure that young girl who traumatizes him in the toilets is actually related to the director as well. I think it's his niece, might be his daughter. I don't know. But I noticed that this film is like littered with very strange arcs, like in not arcs but characters. Like their auntie, who gets who's Oz Perkins' wife in there. That's the daughter of Eugene Levy, and that she's in Schitt's Creek as well. And I remember watching the film. I was like, I've seen this woman before, and there's like it's so strange to just litter that in out of nowhere. And there is comedic like endeavor there as well, but there's a lot of strange choices here. Granted, it not even just about the tone of the film, but sort of in a meta way of like it brings you in, it brings you out, it brings you in. Like the Adam Scott thing, we're trying to set up a film, and we're getting brought into an Adam Scott who now is all over the pages with Severance. I'm just thinking to myself, is that really the right way you want to engage with your audience in a big set piece? And then when you get to another quite not gritty and dark, but quite poignant theme of being like having your son get taken away from you with a trauma, although he never adamantly explains to his child why he's only allowed to see him at once a week, once a year for a week or a day. Then you get the Elijah Wood thing brought in. It's like, is that you're wanting to take away from what you're providing here? There's a lot of very strange tonal choices here. That again, like Longlegs, probably won't survive a rewatch. I'm probably too enamored with the horror, but I would love to have seen this just set in 1999, set in the midst of that mother dying, and then this thing's happening to it, to explore that type of trauma, to explore that belief in what's going on, and then end it there, end it in the well, There's a sequence what happens then, and then maybe come back to it in a later day. I don't know. It just feels a very strange way to craft a feature that doesn't really resonate with anyone, especially with an audience.
Well, it's just weird that there's so many that, like, especially when they're adults, that just has like no payoff. Like the fact that there's not one more scene with Elijah Wood where like something happens, like it's so weird that there's these little pieces that the film establishes, and even like big arcs like him and his son, and it just never really finds closure. It never really finds a point or a period or purpose. And then randomly at the end, it's like, mild spoilers alert, there's like a ghost or death or whatever you want to say just randomly there. It's like, what is this? Like, why? What is happening that we are writing this scene as like that's the closure piece and nothing to do with the drama or the 10 characters we've met that have no conclusion? Like, it's very, very weirdly crafted. And I agree with you. Not to beat a dead horse, it's just odd.
The thing about Elijah Wood's character is that, like, just the scene that he has, like, he sounds like the biggest asshole in the world. He's written like all these books on parenting that Theo James is reading, and you're like, oh, he's gonna get killed in a very satisfyingly over the top way. Like, I was expecting that, and the movie just ends, and I go like, what? Wait, what happened to him? Like, I felt a little cheated when you're building that up, and then you're just paying off nothing, I guess, because it felt like the movie needed a little bit more time to wrap things up. But then Oz Perkins was like, yeah, all right, that's enough of that. Let's go on to Keeper, and that's it.
It's such a weird comparison, but I think back to the original Percy Jackson movie. I don't remember if it was the end credit scene or just the final scene in the movie, but you get that little bit of closure, and it's like such a good moment to end on, and it just gives that energy and gives that moment. And here, there's literally nothing. There's not even like a mention of it. Bizarre choices. Maybe going around with some of our final thoughts here. I'll just say bizarre. Like, this movie is one of those where, again, just like Wolfman, where it's just like I can't write it off, and it pisses me off that I can't just be like 1-star garbage, because there are little pieces here, but then there's just so many creative choices. Whenever I see a movie like this, and there's a lot of them every year, I just think like, imagine Oz Perkins being like, "Okay, guys, this is the final film. You're Neon. You're sitting down, and this is what you watch." And partway through, you're just like, you just turn, you're like, "What the fuck is this? Is this like a joke?" It doesn't work. I think there's so many missed opportunities here. Again, little pieces that are interesting. I just hope that, like, I'm very concerned. Jack, you brought this up. I'm happy you did. I was going to, about him making these 3 films back to back, specifically also this collaboration with Neon, where they're really trying to push Oz Perkins as like a brand and as a feeling, as like as a special filmmaker. I am so worried that we're going to get more and more features that resemble this than even resemble Longlegs, much less his earlier work. Because I think at one time he was this really unique, I would say ahead of the game filmmaker as far as what he was delivering in the horror genre would ultimately be the style of like 3 years later. I think he was always a little bit ahead of the curve there. But it's more movies like The Monkey. I don't know if I want a lot more Oz Perkins films. I'm so sorry. So I guess we'll get more development on that story as his next film releases. But I'm concerned. But overall, I guess The Monkey did not obviously do much for me. Maxence, do you have anything left you want to talk about?
I don't think this filmmaking thing is working for Oz Perkins very much, and that's okay. There are other hobbies that and endeavors that you can find in your career, because it's not working. I'm sorry, it's not working. None of his movies are good. This was terrible. This was as bad as Longlegs, like I said in my, I guess, opening thoughts. It's awful, and I feel cheated for, again, watching another movie thinking, okay, this one's probably going to be good, and then it just ends up being the same garbage, and I'm sorry to Osgood Perkins. I'm sure he's a great guy. He's gone through a lot. That's very, it's a very tragic past. It's terrible. I don't even wish my mortal enemy to live what he went through. But I'm you know he, that doesn't make him a good filmmaker. I'm sorry, he's terrible. What can I say? He's made nothing but garbage, and this is another terrible film. What can I say? I gave it 1 star on Letterboxd, and yeah,
Would you say this or Longlegs is worse for you?
they're both
If you had to pick one. Fair enough.
They're both terrible.
Jack, bring us some light. I want to hear why this is good. Sell me on it.
I'm more positive than the 1 star. I really like this. I thought it was like just refreshing to watch in an age of horror movies I've seen at the cinema lately, where they're just being so silly, so dumb, so derivative, and just generally boring. Like Imaginary was like one of the worst experiences I've had in the cinema. This felt genuinely quite refreshing. The fact it didn't take itself very seriously. I was engaged with the violence and kills in here. We didn't get to really touch upon that, but there's a, like, you mentioned something with bees. There was that felt so predictable, yet I thought it was genuinely horrifying to watch. There's a tremendous amount of gore here, but it's tongue in cheek. It's fun. It's about a monkey that's evil, that's causing death. And I think if you go into go into that with the very similar type of tone and sentiment, I think you'll find an interesting experience. I wouldn't say this is rewarding. It's a very one note, simplistic yet quite entertaining horror film. I think that you'll get revolted. I think you'll be revolted. I think you'll be engaged. You'll find a lot of entertainment value here. There are certain set pieces and kills here, which are granted are very quick and over and done with, but they are quite entertaining nevertheless. I would watch this with a group of friends, a group of, like, just on a Friday night, get a pizza, get some Diet Cokes or whatever you're into, glasses of water, and then watch it and have some fun with it in the dark. I don't think it's there to propel you into an atmosphere of being terrified or horrified. I just think it's one of those features that it would play really well at the drive-through. I think it does have some legs in it. I think it's just one of those films where in 10 years' time, I do think we'll come back on this and have a bit more of a positive scenario compared to what he'll make next. I think the keeper interests me because it's another secluded cabin story. Not too sure where he's going to go with that, but I agree with what Max and what you said. I don't think that tonally, narratively, or thematically is going to be any different to what anyone else has ever seen, nor that he has achieved or executed within his filmography. I think it's just going to have to be something that it is going to really. There's going to have to be something that elevates. It's going to be spooky or it's going to be horrifying. It's going to have to be one of the two, because I don't think his filmmaking skill nor his direction will be able to heighten or elevate that material of what the synopsis entails anyway, which it seems to be a one-note location. And as much as Tatiana is an incredible actress, I think she's really good here. And I think she's starting to be getting her flowers as well. You've got to have an incredible amount of material to work with in order to carry the weight of that a film like that on her shoulders. I think The Lodge struggled with it a few years ago in 2019. But nevertheless, I watch it, have some fun with it. It seems to be working. The Neon thing you mentioned earlier, Carson, about it's a number one film for Neon ever. It's surpassed quite a few other notable entries. So, however the audiences are taking this, or the promotion is there, it's working. I don't know what else horror wise you could go watch now, aside from Captain America: Brave New World, which I know is a different type of horror film, but it's definitely out there. I could have watched that back to back today. I was just so fucking bored of wanting to go watch an MCU movie. I said no. I was going to watch them back to. I thought, fuck that. I'll just go home. I'm glad I did. I enjoyed this. Go watch it. I generally would recommend it. I'm leaning on like a 3-star. I mean, I wouldn't go to a 1, and I think Carson, you're at the 2. I'll go a strong 3. I'd love to know in a year's time, coming back to this, what everyone would think, because I think we'd all probably just agree with the exact same steps. I don't think it's got much of a life compared to like the likes of Longlegs. But yeah, go watch it. I think you'll have a good time with it compared to the other shit that other people have been releasing as of late in the horror genre. It's definitely worth the while. I would recommend it.
Well, everyone can wait. In 10 years, 2035, we'll be back for our Monkey 10-year anniversary retrospective, where we can all debate if this film holds up or not, I suppose. If you want to watch The Monkey, you can in theaters right now. I'm sure it'll be on streaming at this rate with how movies are, probably in like 3 weeks. But I'd recommend you see it with a crowd in the theater, as long as the crowd is there, which I think will probably fizzle pretty quickly. But alas, that's going to do it for our conversation on Oz Perkins' The Monkey. For our question of the week, we are asking, what is your favorite Stephen King adaptation? Jack, what would you pick for this?
This was tough. I'm not that. I know that Jakob's done this thing on X or Twitter. Like he's majorly into this stuff with Stephen King. He's like trying to watch every adaptation. And I've seen a few, but sometimes they generally just come up in the Hooptober stuff. So I can't be out there to be like, I love a list and I love that. I have a few. I'm going to do 2 honorable mentions, and I'm going to talk about the movies. I thought It. I've not read the book. Granted, there's certain things in the book I'm not really interested in reading, but I was surprised when it came out and of how much of an impact it had on the horror genre. It feels like people were screaming for that film to be made. I think, granted, whatever I think of Chapter 2, which I wrote the review for Clapper years ago now, which I didn't really like. I like number 1. I thought it was quite refreshing. Another one is going to be, what was it? Another honorable. No, I was just going to say another honorable mention. I don't think I've got another one. That was my honorable mention. My number 1 here, and this is because I did Hooptober 2 years ago. I didn't know this was a Stephen King adaptation. I didn't even know very much anything about this whatsoever. It's The Dead Zone starring Christopher Walken. What a shock and surprise that was. I don't know if this is based on a original short story. I don't know if it's a book. I don't know what Stephen King's relationship with it is, but I remember watching this and be like, I have seen this somewhere. And the film is really good, and Christopher Walken plays such a fucking strange person in that. And David Cronenberg, one of the sort of like trying to get a commercial hit in a feature about Christopher Walken who can touch someone and see the death. And then that film is profoundly now poignant considering the presidential run that you've had in your country, Carson, and creating that film. Not to spoil anything, but Dead Zone's strangely prolific in finding out the future. But Anthony Michael Hall played him on a TV show, the Dead Zone, and I remember this is like a childhood memory, man. Remembering touching a hockey player played by one of the brothers in Malcolm in the Middle, one of the twin brothers. I can't remember the names. and the guy snaps his leg and like breaks his leg and it like ruins his career. And he tells him not to play hockey. And I remember it stayed with me ever since I was little, about 5, 6, 7, watching on like Channel 5 or something in the UK. So I'm gonna go The Dead Zone. I hope that's a strange answer. I hope it's not like The Green Mile for anyone out there, but the Dead Zone, go watch it. Cronenberg classic.
Max, what would you say for this?
No question in my mind that it's Brian De Palma's Carrie, the greatest Stephen King adaptation of all time, one of the greatest horror movies. Well, horror movies, it's more of a tragedy, if you will. It's one of the saddest films you will probably watch in your entire life. And, De Palma's the GOAT, so why would I pick anything else than that?
Sure. I mean, I agree. My answer would be Carrie also, if we're just talking about standard adaptation. My favorite film that's an adaptation would be The Shining, but I mean, that's a pretty objectively bad adaptation. Dr. Sleep's also really strong, I would say. I will also mention, though, to the TV show Castle Rock. I'm sure I've talked about it on this podcast before. Really unique concept of taking a bunch of different narrative beats from a bunch of Stephen King's work and kind of mashing it into an original narrative. I really appreciated that show. I think I remember season 1 was a little bit better than season 2, but I thought it was a unique adaptation and one I definitely enjoyed. There's a lot of Stephen King adaptations coming out weirdly over the next couple of years. I know Kyle's a pretty big fan. I know Jakob, as you mentioned, Jack, is doing his entire series for multiple years of reading every single Stephen King work and then watching every single adaptation of the book or of the short story or whatever it is. So more power to him. I'm sure we'll talk about Stephen King with those two eventually. That's going to do it for our question of the week. Finally, rounding this out with our rapid reviews, anything we've seen recently that we want to talk about. Jack, what have you seen this week?
This is going to be quite anticlimactic because I haven't really seen much. I've just been continuing watching Bogart movies and doing the Black History Month, and I'll name a few of them because I don't know what I mentioned last week, so I think I'll just start afresh. I'll start with the Bogarts. I watched John Huston's Beat the Devil, which I shouldn't have done it, but I read Nicolo Grasso's review of it on Letterboxd before I watched it, and I didn't know what genre it was. And then when he said it was comedy, and I watched the film, I was like, I'm sorry, what comedy that is not it's such a strange film. And having seen his relationship with Houston, Bogart's relationship with Houston in The Maltese Falcon, I was like, I cannot believe 10 years later this is not 10 years later, but 12 years later, that is the same director partnership. It's not a horribly made film. It's just a horrible film. It's not funny. It's not entertaining. It's never endearing. It's such a strange farce. And then I had to finish the John Huston quadrilogy, so I did for the first time watch The Treasure of Sierra Madre, with Bogart as well. Outstanding. Its cinematic prevalence in film, especially with the Indiana Jones character, is so apparent. Very tragic. The descent into madness. Two drifters just going up there. Walter, is it Walter Houston, his father? Yeah, Walter Houston, his dad's in it. Won an Academy Award. He's terrific. Bogart shows this descent into darkness. There's a sequence where he's running around in the dark and he's got a stick on fire. I'm like, that's Spielberg. This is so evidently clear that Spielberg saw this and was like, Raiders. And it's not even that it's revisionism make this better at all. But there's stuff here that John Huston's trying to get away with against the censors. I think is genuinely horrific for its time, especially with a certain death sequence in here, which I'm not going to spoil, although it's 1948, I think. It really does go quite far in certain using weapons and stuff like that. Go watch it. I watched Across the Pacific, which is one of his other Huston and Bogart films, not considered to be in anywhere in the leagues of the other two, and especially another one I'm going to mention later. But I enjoyed it. It feels like Across the Pacific and Tokyo Joe is before he met Lauren Bacall and after he met Lauren Bacall, because I think Lauren Bacall was very much adamant in him getting to politics and making certain amends for things he did. Not amends, but having a voice. And I think Across the Pacific is him, using the military might against the Japanese, because again, I don't need to explain the history here. But then when you watch Tokyo Joe, it's him coming out after the one, trying to make a relationship with them, which I think is an interesting parallel to the two films. It was good, not great, but very good. Has a really fun last act that goes into the jungle. Very strange but fun. And then I watched this today after the Monkey. I watched The African Queen for the first time, and I really liked it. I thought it was really fun. If you watch Humphrey Bogart and his normal stuff, and then watch him with John Huston, totally different actor. I'd be fascinated to know if you two have watched Bogart or even with John Huston or not. But if you watch him on his own, which is very good, like the likes of Casablanca and other things, he's very good. But when you see him with John Huston, is a totally different beast. To the extent when he delivers dialogue, like you can tell he gets it, or he's been working with the director who's pushing him to push away from the standard golden age of cinema, just saying your lines. Like he says something, he has a bit of passion when he speaks with the Houston dialogue, and the African Queen is outstanding. And then very briefly here, I did 3 more films for Black History Month. I watched Mario Van Peebles' New Jack City, which I'd heard a lot about, never seen, because it's got the really infamous meme with Wesley Snipes with a gun on a rooftop, which is like meme to death now. Which I didn't know this was in this until I watched it. I was like, this is strangely familiar. I liked it. It's very rough around the edges. I think there's a lot here that doesn't work. A lot of it is rough around the edges. I think Ice-T in his one of his first films is incredibly rough around the edges. I think Chris Rock is very good here. I think Mario Van Peebles' direction is sometimes a little chaotic, very 90s, very early 90s anyway, very much like Hackers. Has a tremendously profound finale. Very, very grim. I think if you had a different director who could just slow this down a little bit, I think New Jack City would be a phenomenal film. I think it would be a staple of the zeitgeist. But as is, it's like Hackers meets Goodfellas, which I quite like. I know it's a strange sentiment. I watched the director's cut straight out of Compton because it was on television. I still have a strange relationship with that film. I've seen it 3 times now. I always like it, and then one before the end, I'm like, I just don't know why I don't love this, but I just think it's fine. And then, strangely, I didn't. This is not conscious, but we did To Sleep with Anger last week on the podcast. Charles Burnett directed it. I didn't know a lot about Charles Burnett. Don't think either of us did, Carson. And I was like, well, I'll see. I loved that film, by the way. Like, I think it's phenomenal. And I was like, well, maybe I'll watch something else of him. And on my list was The Glass Shield. And I didn't know he'd made this. And The Glass Shield I should have watched years ago for university, 2018. I didn't. And the BFI did a re-release of it on a Blu-ray. I don't know if I own that, but it was on Amazon. And I was like, I'll watch it. Very good. Very good. An interesting take on police brutality within the police system, not with the victim, which usually would be would be a feature which would sort of revolve around an interesting feature, nowhere near as exhilarating or as profound as To Sleep with Anger, but nevertheless a very interesting feature that gives brevity and poignancy to being black within a white culture or systemic institutionalized culture that goes against the black community, trying to both fit in and also trying to stand up for their own culture, and then having that issue between there and coming out of it with not very clean, let's say, no matter if you have a positive or trying to do the right thing, they're still coming out with it with scars and sometimes the end result of it being quite laden tragedy, a quite bitter finale, but ultimately an interesting feature, but nowhere near to the levels of To Sleep with Anger. And that's really it. I haven't seen. I'm not watching anything new, and I don't know if Max knows this, but I've fucking bored shitless of everything new that's coming out. And there's a lot of good stuff that's going to come out this year. But after watching Nosferatu and seeing movies come out, like, I'm not going to watch Captain America. I can't do it. Although I know that someone here is in love with the Bridget Jones movie, and for me, I can't go and watch that, and nothing else is doing it for me. I don't. Companion maybe, but with Carson's
Love
review of The
Hurts is
Gorge,
right there. Love Hurts is literally right there.
stop being silly. Stop being silly. I'm not indulging this silliness. But Carson's review of The Gorge was so highlighting of the problems with the best things are coming out of the movies right now. I couldn't do it to myself. And Paddington Peru is not going to save it. And The Brutalist, I'm never going to be able to watch it where I live. So it's pretty dark for me at the moment. So I mean, it's either Amelia Perez or I don't know what else, to be honest. So we'll see what happens. But that's all I've seen. But thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed this. And yeah, Bogart's going on really well. I can't wait to finish it. And Black History Month's coming to an end. That's going to be good as well.
I threw mine away, Max. But, I love that you kept yours.
Oh my God, wow. You wear that with so much pride.
What have you seen this week, Max?
I recommend, Jack, if I don't know if it's playing near you, but Captain America sucked. Companion was not great. Hard Eyes was not great. Love Hurts was not great. Paddington's good, but Neja 2 is peak animation. I mean, that is staggering. The highest grossing animated movie in history, and with a very good reason. It is astonishing from beginning to end. It is one of the greatest. It has some of the greatest animation you'll probably ever see. And I'm like, this is not hyperbole, but like the standards that China has in creating incredibly artful, bright, vivid compositions are way ahead of what Pixar is doing. Even in this movie, it's insane. Like, I was literally watching the movie in a sold out auditorium of like 500 seats, completely sold out, still sold out. Again, this week you cannot get a ticket at the only cinema where it's playing near me, and it was just insane. I enjoyed the first one, but this just takes the cake. It's way better than the first one, 1,000%. I also, I love the Bridget Jones movie. I'm sorry. I think it should have been in the theater. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful meditation on grief. It's extremely layered, way more intimate and personal than I thought it was going to be, but I guess I kind of half expected it because it's directed by the guy who made To Leslie. So I guess that makes sense. Yeah, it does. It makes a little bit of sense. Speaking of Bogart, I also watched All Through the Night, where Bogart plays an average Joe who essentially gets embroiled in a political conspiracy involving Nazis. That was very good, actually better than I thought it was going to be. Visually incredible. And when you watch a Bogart film, what's interesting is that you think he's just the greatest actor who's ever graced the silver screen. He's got this incredible sense of timing, charisma. He really knows how to work a camera. It's just incredible. I think the best movie of the year so far is Broken Rage by Takashi Kitano. It's available on Prime Video. It's 62 minutes long, so literally no excuse for any of you to watch it. I doubt there'll be a funnier film released this year than this one, so that was good. I also blind watched The House That Screamed, which is a Spanish horror film, via an Arrow Blu-ray that I bought over at the Fantasia Festival. Finally watched it, and pretty good. Way better than I thought it was going to be. The score is incredible. I had no expectations. I don't know why I said it was way better than I thought it was going to be, but I didn't really know what to expect, and I was quite impressed with it. And yesterday I went to see Partenope by Paolo Sorrentino, his latest movie. All I'm going to say is that the haters are wrong. He is not missed. This film is very good. There may be one moment where I was like, okay, this is too big of a swing, but everything else works. The main actor, Celeste Dalla Porta, is incredible. I've not seen her in a movie. I think it's a breakout role. Like, really one of the best breakout roles I've seen in a long time. The way that Sorrentino captures Naples, he did it in The Hand of God. It's very different in this film than in his previous movie, and I liked how he captures both eras that he wants to track in both of the films that he's made that makes the city very, very vibrant and oftentimes, a character of its own that I thought was, incredibly compelling. And that's about it. I'm trying to see if I've watched anything else of note. Oh yeah, I finally watched "Oh Canada" by Paul Schrader, which I thought was pretty good. Not amazing, but a better movie than I thought it was going to be. And so yeah, I've not been. I'm going to say so far, 2025 has been a pretty good year for Asian cinema, and we'll see what happens. I'm looking forward to see Mickey 17 very soon. I think it'll be a better year than 2024. It's not saying 2024 was a bad year, wasn't a memorable one. Hopefully, this year will be better, but it's too early to tell right now.
I want the record to state that Paul Schrader was brought up twice in this episode, and neither one was me bringing him up, so it's not always me.
Hey, I'm a Paul Schrader fan. I love Paul Schrader.
Oh, he's awesome. Canada's a great movie, Jack. You should watch. I haven't seen a lot this week, so it's going to be pretty quick. I watched Snowpiercer because I'm trying to catch up with the Bong Joon-ho films I haven't seen before Mickey 17. It's fine. It's very interesting world, great action, and I know this was 2013, but it just really bothers me at this point to watch films that are trying to have important conversations, but just take the stupidest avenues to have those conversations. Very, very minor, well, I guess major spoilers for Snowpiercer, but I would love for this film to play 10 more minutes and show everyone freeze to death and then be well, put that in conversation with your whole story on revolution and over. It's such a worthy film in so many ways, but at the same time, it just does not know actually how to have an interesting, mature, thoughtful conversation within it. It really bothered me, but the action is fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I watched Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven for the first time, which I was really shocked that this Clint Eastwood Western out of Jack, Niccolo, Jakob, I think Hillary, I was the one that was most positive on this, at least according to Letterboxd reviews. I love this film. I thought it was a really, really compelling look at revenge, and also just shot beautifully. The colors here, the aesthetic, I think that really fixed a lot of my issues with this genre typically. I really was into that film. And then finally, kind of speaking of Theo James related stuff, we got episode 1 of season 3 of The White Lotus since last time we recorded, and I loved it. A big fan of the show. If you're a longtime listener, we've talked about both previous seasons. This is probably the best and most compelling episode 1 to a season we've got so far. Obviously, we will see how the rest of the season plays out, but very much so still a fan of that show. And I would love if, myself, and I know Paul's a huge fan and Paul loved this episode, we could do an episode at the end of the season, because super, I think, worthwhile to talk about. But with that, that's pretty much all I've seen. So that's going to close it for today. Where can we find everyone on social media? Max, where can we find your writing and words?
Oh, I just want to say I'm currently, if you talk about TV, I just started watching Cobra Kai not long ago because the new Karate Kid movie's coming out. I had never watched Cobra Kai. Incredible. 10 out of 10. Peak. Great TV. Everyone watch Cobra Kai. I don't know how the last season's, I don't know if it's good or not. I'm currently at season 2 and I've been loving it. Anyways, you can follow me on social media, all social media, same handle, Max from Quebec. Because I am from Quebec, I do live there. It is not the 51st state, contrary to popular belief. It's Canada's never going to be the 51st state. I don't know if Quebec is going to be a country. That's debatable. There's always the eternal debate that's plagued every election cycle. But whatever. I don't want to get into politics. But Max from Quebec, social media, all social media, Twitter, X, Instagram, Blue Sky, whatever. I'm there. You can follow me there. Follow my work. Basically, I'm writing for anyone that wants to have me, so I'm all over the place. I'm going to have some reviews out very soon of Sweetheart's latest film, Legend of the Condor Heroes, The Gallants, which I liked a lot, and Partenope, so look forward to that. So Max from Quebec on all social media.
Jack, where can we find you?
You can find my dormant account on Twitter or X, where I just repost usual shit, to be fair. I find that social media game really fucking dull on X and Twitter. I'm not going to go to Blue Sky. I just can't do it. But you can find me primarily on Letterboxd, where I'm undertaking. I've been on Letterboxd this year 10 years, which is my first review was Point Break, the remake, 2015. which breaks my heart in a sense. But 10 years on there, never look back. So this year I'm doing trying to just go back to watch older movies and exploring cinema and trying to just get some more fun with that. I've had a difficult relationship with watching new stuff, like I've joked within this episode, but after watching Nosferatu, I'm like, nothing is going to be better for me this year. And I'm not going to waste my weekends going to watch Captain America. And I want to watch stuff I like as well. Me and Cass avoided this battle. It's difficult watching everything and then watching stuff you like. I think it's, you do have to explore a lot of stuff, but I want to go back, and I'm looking at Cagney, I'm looking at Bogart. I'm going to do 100 horror movies. I'm going to do September, October, and I'm going to do November, October. I'm going to do a fucking 3-month. I'm going to do it Women's History Month in March, Pride Month in June, and I'm going to do Asian Cinema Month in August because I can't fit in anywhere else. But yeah, I'm just celebrating loads of movies on there. And the occasion I'll do some like new stuff. Like I'm gonna watch the film that Max recommended. I'm gonna watch Your Canada that someone else has recommended. You've got to sell me on White Lotus. I don't get that. I don't understand why people love that show. I actually just don't get it. It's people at a hotel. I'm just gonna sound like an old man there, but you have to sell me on that after the show. But you can find me on Letterboxd. We can find all my reviews, and you can find me on Clapper, where I'm going to review The Monkey, which I forgot I was going to review, and then you can read my other reviews like Gladiator 2, which I hated. That could not be. My boy Ridley Scott let me down. Some features on there on occasion, but you can find me on there with the usernames at Jak-Luke Sharp. But thanks very much for having me, Carson. It's lovely to see you as well, Max. I haven't seen you in a while, so it's lovely to have you spend my Sunday night with you both. So thank you very much for indulging me.
I love the idea that your small town theater is playing Chinese animation. I hope it's true, but I love the idea that it is.
No, we're not having that. I haven't even got the Bob Dylan movie yet. No, we've got Con Air coming out. I mean, 1997 classic. To found that is genuinely a classic though. Nicolas Cage.
Never seen it.
You've never seen Con Air?
No.
You Gus, you've got.
I'll add it to the list.
You'll like Con Air, I think.
We'll talk about it one day.
Yeah, I don't think you will, but I'd be interested to see your opinion.
You can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd just under Carson Timar, words at Filmotomy, Clapper, and anywhere else that will take my words. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Jack, you are going to the theater again, I believe, because we're going to watch Mickey 17 next.
That comes a day. That's a day after my birthday, by the way.
It's your birthday special.
Yeah, I can't cope with that if that's shit. I'll be really annoyed. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
You know what? Early reactions were positive. So.
Yeah, they usually are, aren't they? To be fair, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see you then in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.